content straight to the end. A little bit more about me. I'm a former CIO with about 25 plus years of IT management experience. I have written the book shown here. I also write for CIO.com and IT World. I'm also a professional coach, keynote speaker, and I'm the immediate past president of National Speakers Association New England. I like saying the immediate past president part because for anyone who's ever been president of a professional association, you know that the most coveted position on the board is past president, meaning you're no longer president. But anyway, from here, let's move to today's topic. As you know, today's title was Cloud Data Quality and Big Data Governance. To that end, we're going to be talking about these three topics through the day, through the hour, I should say. Data governance, is it in regard to what it is and how it's used, etc. Then moving forward to cloud and big data, which actually has its own idiosyncrasies. For those of you who love this topic, these are excerpts of a full-day class that we're doing on October 12th, named, as you can see, the same as the webinar. So let's talk about data governance concepts. What is it? What does it mean? What should we know, etc.? Well, I'd like to start with a dictionary definition. Now, this may seem pretty odd, but the first thing I'm going to is dictionary.com. But when you think of governance, you have to think about it from a number of perspectives. Not only what should be done, but also what other people think about it and think about you if you're in one of these roles. So when people think of the word governance, what they think of is basically government, okay? But look at the next one, exercise of authority and control. So think about it, you know, you're the head of the human resource systems, you're the manager of those systems, and someone comes over to you and says, hello, I'm the new head of data governance, and I'm here to exercise my authority and control over your data. All right, this is where some of the issues get in regarding data governance in general, which is why I like to start with just describing what it is. What's its relevance to IT? Well, is that in the first line shown there is it basically is data and software applications will be threatened, as mentioned. And the next one is this, is that they may resist you to this central data governance because just without knowing exactly what you're doing, what it will do is it can intimidate them or basically think that it will be a loss of control or ownership for them. That's why one of the most important things you can do within your organization is define what data governance is, and even more importantly in many cases, what it is not. Let's start with the what it is not and then move up to what it is. Data governance is not the ownership of every process that stores, moves, or uses data. The reason for that is if you think about it from a software perspective, that would be everything. So as a result of that, it's this that ties back to the governance in the previous slide that makes people working in the application or database area very nervous. So now let's talk about what data governance is. It's basically the activities listed here. I won't go through them all, but I'll do some highlights. Metadata definitions. For people not familiar with the term metadata, what that means is it's data about data. So, for example, the metadata for last name, for example, would be an alphanumeric character, or probably, well, actually could be alphanumeric if you're the second or the third. It's 25 characters in length, etc. So what happens is it's basically the common data definition that will be used for last name, ideally throughout your enterprise. Documentation requirements. Well, that's sort of obvious, but it's what, how, and what ways are the data that you have throughout your system documented. Next one, data flow standards. You know, very often, and we're going to talk about this one a couple of slides down some more, under potential challenges. But what you'll find is that very often, if you look how data is passed through an organization, it's not in a very smooth way. It's application A goes to sends data to application C, which goes to B, which goes to F, which goes to L. Now, system B sends data to A, B, C, D, and E, and basically it looks like a bowl of spaghetti if you try to map all this out. Well, as all that data is moving around, it's important to basically have the same data definitions across all your systems or data can be lost. Database referential integrity. What those are is, or the guidelines for them, what referential integrity is it's basically the idea that of local and foreign keys for any of you that are database oriented. In other words, is if I have a zip code file, excuse me, we're based in Ashland, Massachusetts, our zip code is 01721. So presumably, if you have a zip code file, that will connect to the city and town of Ashland, Massachusetts. If that key does not exist, then you have a zip code, and all of a sudden you have no idea what town it's in. Things along that line, or the country codes should match. But it's basically the rules around those, as well as various types of data checking. And also a big part of what data governance is just setting up a corporate culture that maximizes data quality. What that means is you probably see some of them up in your office walls related to security, or related to, what you'll see is that, data security is everyone's job. Watch out for this and that and so on. So it's basically, an educational, type role that you're playing related to the importance of data within the company. Now, what this eye chart is, and now you'll see that I'm going to bring in information from two leaders in the field, or at least who I feel are leaders in the field. One is L&T Infotech, and the other is a small company you may have heard about. They've been around for quite a while, though. Their name is IBM. Obviously, also very, very big in the data and big data space. But what this is what they call obviously the 9 C's of what's big data and life cycle. Now, all the data, whether it's big, whether it's small, whether it's transaction-based, whatever it is, follows all of these steps. The reason that this is so important for you to know is because data needs to be protected, it needs to be properly moved, properly stored, properly backed up as it moves through your organization. So the first one here, starting with the top center, is you have to consider what data do you have. Then moving to the right, following the arrows, how can it be collected, collated? What that means is connected up with other data, maintained, and what that is basically is stored. Then it has to be classified. It has to be associated to what type of data it is. Moving from a big data perspective, then, is what you're doing is you have to correlate it. In other words, gain meaning from that data. Consume it, which means develop reports, things along that line. Confirm that the data is correct. And then from that, make final conclusions. Now, I'm going to talk about data, and I'm going to sort of tie it in because data these days has gotten so tied in with big data and analytics and so on. We won't be really talking much about analytics here, but I want to give you one quick story. The example that I'm going to use is a very commonly used one. I didn't make it up. And no offense to those who may smoke cigarettes. But as an example of how data can be misread, there is almost a direct one-to-one correlation between people who own ashtrays and people who have lung cancer. So as a result of that, the way to cure lung cancer is to do what? Is to get rid of people's ashtrays. Obviously, that's a totally ridiculous correlation that you would use. Obviously, both of them are indicators of people who smoke. But what happens is, as you're analyzing data, as you're storing data and using it for other things, you have to be really, really careful. Because if you draw correlations like that obviously would be nowhere near as obvious as that one, it's very, very easy to make decisions on data, to be reporting data, to do further analytics on data that's not found on true analysis. I was talking to some big data people, and actually big data people, what they said to me, they said, you know what, the math isn't all that difficult. The storage of it, yeah, it's big, but we have Hadoop and we have other applications around the sides. It says the hardest part of big data analytics and data science is figuring out what questions to ask. So as we go through these three now, Think of it certainly from a governance perspective, but also part of governance, as you'll see, is gaining an understanding and an appreciation for the importance of the data and how the data is used. Now, let's look at the dimensions of data quality by that small company I mentioned, IBM. Now, if you look at it from the bottom up, what you'll see is that the supporting disciplines, what the supporting disciplines mean is that's the actual work getting done on a day-to-day basis. Data architecture, is that as we get into the cloud computing area, you'll see that data architecture is becoming a very, very scary thing, excuse me, in a cloud-based model. But what data architecture is for here, and we'll talk about it more a few slides down, is it means how is the data architected? I hate to use that word in it, but are you using data warehouses? Are you using do you have duplication of data by design within your application? If you do, what is the reconciliation process? You're making sure that if you have my last name in the system A, that my last name is the same in system B. Now, things that don't change much, like for example my last name, I've had it for a very long time, and well, I expect to have it for a very long time going forward. However, my address, my phone number, things like that can change. So how do you keep that consistent across applications? The next one, clarification and metadata. I'm going to give you a specific example now of metadata that I referred to before with last name. Let's say your payroll system has a last name field that's 15 characters of length. And your human resource system has a last name field that's 20 characters in length. Now, the reason for 20 is, or 25 actually, many are going with, but both for the combination of hyphenated names. Also, if there's anyone who's from India on the line, will know that there's many Indian names that go, last names that go beyond 15 characters, as there are many German and actually Hispanic names if they're hyphen. So as a result of that, what happens is you work really, really hard in the human resource system. You get everybody's full name. You finally expanded that field to 25 characters. And then what you do is you have a process to assure that the information is right, is then you feed that data on a daily basis into the payroll system, which makes sure everyone's payroll is right, and then it feeds that data back to human resources system. Guess what? All that time you've spent putting those least significant characters, the characters 16 to 25 in your HR system are now gone. That's why this cross-system stuff and data quality is so important. And lastly, of course, being able to audit the information, making sure it's only used for things it can legally be used for, as well as logging it to know where it is, as well as where it came from. Now, with those supporting architectures, that physical work that's being done, those supporting disciplines, is let's move it up a level to the core disciplines. What are you really doing by doing those things across the bottom line? Well, that's data quality management. It's the information life cycle management, which ties back to the previous slide that we talked about here. And lastly, there's information security and privacy. I'm going to talk about, there are two huge topics. Privacy, of course, is, who can see what data about you. There's huge regulation related to that. The most common one you see, the poster child for that, is HIPAA, which is in the medical space, who can and cannot see your medical records. But data security is that with everything going on with the breaches that you've seen, with I'll just say, I will just say large companies. I won't mention some, but some of the most respected retail firms in the world have had data breaches where tens of millions of credit cards have been taken. There was also a company out of LA, which I think we all know. They came out with a movie related to what was it, North Korea, and all of a sudden they got hacked. Whether it was related to that or not, that's not for me to know or understand. But in any case, what happened is that, as we all know, Sony Entertainment was hacked. That was a different type. They went in, rather than finding credit cards, they basically did it to humiliate the company because they were doing something that, well, the people, whoever did it, didn't like. So as a result, data security has gone beyond protecting credit card data, but it's expanded into email, into basically anything that's physically stored inside your data servers. Moving up a couple of levels now, and then to the enablers. What enables those core disciplines to be driven? That, of course, would be the stewardship and the physical policies that are written. And then the outcomes of all that are basically the value that is put into your data, as well as the data risks, minimization of data risks. Now let's talk about some potential challenges to data management and governance. The first of which is empathy. You know, how many companies really spend a lot of time thinking about, is their data of high quality, is it protected, is it the same in system to system? You know, there'll be some type of data error that causes company money. All of a sudden they're digging in and doing work, they're doing work to correct it. Management changes, other priorities take place, and it just moves into being from very important to something that's on the back burner. Alignment with company objectives. In other words, is the data that you have in your systems there in a way that it can be properly used to help drive company goals? Infighting over data stewardship, these next two go together, as well as intertwined infrastructures. In other words, who owns the data? Does IT own it, or does the business own it? If neither one thinks they do, then certainly if there's no one in your company whose paycheck is based on the quality of data and data governance, you can bet that it's not being governed company-wide. And with that lack of person, what comes is a lack of an overall long-term plan. The human resources systems person makes sure that that data is really good. The HR person, the person in HR, accompanied by the IT person supporting those systems, makes sure that that data is really good. But they don't go cross-application area. And what that's due to is a lack of company focus and decentralized stewardship, meaning that every area is in charge of their own little chunk of data, but there's no overlying force. What causes that is cross-system politics and silos, both on the business side as well as on the technology side. Or also, you know, data is more and more becoming an enormous asset of the company. Companies are making money by selling the data they have internally. Quite frankly, that's where a lot of the social media companies generate their revenue. And then along with that is there's the cost of proper oversight. You know, it's very smart. It takes very smart people to properly oversee data, and those smart people need expensive applications and support to be able to maintain it. That's not something that comes cheap to organizations. So data governance from a challenge perspective, what it comes down to is who's going to do it and who's going to fund it. Now I'd like to turn back to IBM. Now, specifically here, what I'd like to talk about with them is they have what they call there's 11 of them, but they're 11 disciplines of data governance maturity. I want to talk about maturity first and maturity models. And what that is that the idea of maturity is, and I'm going to go back to its initial usage, was by Carnegie Mellon developed this for the U.S. government and Department of Defense on can software be developed consistently by a particular firm. They came up with CMM. Those of you closer to my age than to new Gen Yers would probably remember the CMM conferences that were done. But anyway, what that stands for is capacity maturity model. What that means is that there were 5 levels to it, the first of which was just ad hoc programming, where everyone just sort of, did it with no sort of standards or rules. And as it went from level 1 to level 5, what happened is that there's repeatability, there's measurement, there's analysis, there's quality controls, etc. So what I would say is, as we go through these 11 different factors, is I would assess, if I were you, try assessing it from a maturity perspective of your organization. And at the end of it, how mature is your organization from a data management perspective? The words that you see underlined here are not underlined in their blueprint document. They're ones specifically for you here So basically to highlight the important words, as well as to basically be able to move through the slides at a reasonable speed. How's that for blatant honesty? But on the first one here, organizational awareness. What that really comes down to is who's responsible for it. It's the responsibility between business and IT. In best cases, it's both. You know, as IT people, we're like plumbers. Plumbers are really good for moving water from place to place, but they don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to to water quality. That's someone else's job. We as IT people, very often, we're very good at moving data from place to place. But in the majority of those cases, we're not the one who uses the data. We just move it, store it, display it, provide tools for people to create it and access it. So it's this joint ownership. The next one under stewardship, what that really is quality control discipline. In other words, how do you know that the data within your systems are correct? Now, what I'm also going to say is that different types of data require different levels of quality. For example, your log data, patient records, they better be as close to 100% as humanly possible. How about CRM data, sales data, things along that line? Say, mailing list data. That's never really more than 80 or 90% correct at best. Why? Because think about it. If you move from one town to the next, are you going to sit back and say, gee, who are all the people who send me junk mail? I better call each one of them and make sure they have my new address, so when I get that so I can get that new junk mail that I'm going to look at and toss right in the recycling bin. Of course not. Neither does anybody else. So as a result of that, marketing data of this type can never be 100%. You know, a favorite quote of mine is by Dr. House on the TV show, and what it is that it says, if your DNA was 98% correct, you'd be a dolphin. But anyway, policies. What these are referring to are written articulation, or it's the written rules that your company has put together. Because if they're not written down and you're in a big company, they won't be consistent by definition. And value creation. You know, in other words, is that what is your company doing to analyze its data, understand its quality, and maximize its value from, here it says business, but I'm going to say from a revenue generation, from an analytics perspective, and so on. Like when you go to Amazon.com and you buy a book, for example, I don't know, mine, CIO's Guide, or the one actually that, CIO's Guide to Staff Needs, Growth, and Productivity. I have a couple of new ones coming out, but that's for another day. So you go and you buy my book, and when it says, you go there and it says, it will say, people who bought this book have also bought books B, C, and D. Why do they have that there? For you to buy more books. You say, gee, you know what? I really like Bloom's book on CIO's Guide to Staff Needs, Growth, and Productivity, but I also like this other book on, related to CIOs and management. Maybe I'll get that one too. Now, how do you think they can do that? How do they know what people bought one book that also buy other books? It's by mining and analyzing their data for revenue purposes. So what I would charge you with is, what other ways can you use your company's data to make money for them? Next, data risk. Well, we talked about that from a number of perspectives. And, those 9 steps that we talked about, if you remember earlier, consider, collect, collate, contain, classify, etc., related to L&T, is that every one of those, your data becomes at risk. So think about it. When you go, what's the number one thing we as techies have been told for 50 years related to data? Back it up. Well, when we back it up, what does that do? That prevents it from loss. What else does it do? It puts it in another physical location where it can be stolen and breached, which ties us to data security. Here it's basically protecting the data. I won't belabor that one. We all know the importance of that. Next is data architecture. It's enabling data availability and distribution. If you have great data within your organization, Is it being moved to where it can be used effectively? I'll give you an example that I will tie to again later in this presentation. Let's say, for example, you're on the working on the CRM system. Again, that's the one that the salespeople use if you're not from that world. Well, wouldn't it be good for the salespeople to know which of their customers are not paying their bills? Well, where does that data reside? In the accounts receivable system. Why is it important? Because salespeople shouldn't be selling and shipping more product to customers who aren't paying for it. So there's an example of data movement that's tied intricately to data architecture. Is the data being moved to where it can be best used? And number 8, data quality, is that this is basically one of the underpinnings to certify that the quality and integrity of the data is correct. Numbers 9, 10, and 11. 9 is metadata. It's the creation of it and the importance of it, as we mentioned, with last name of 15 verse 25 characters. Information lifecycle management, that's, back to those 9 things that we talked about in our first slide. Consider, collect, collate, etc. Because all data that you have within your data center, whether it be transactional or whatnot, it was originally collected in some way. It was stored. It's hopefully being used for something, and then at some point all data is deleted. So what is the process that moves through that, and is it being done as efficiently and, quite frankly, as low cost as possible? And last is audit and reporting. Audited, if you put these two together, auditing basically means, is it accurate? Is the processes in place to do all those things, to collect it, to store it, to retain it, to delete it, etc.? And the reporting of it is to gain an understanding of where your data is. That's not using data for reporting. It's doing reporting related to the data. That brings us to cloud computing. Now, here I'm cutting back to actually another provider. Now, for those of you who are really involved in cloud-based security, you should take this down, CSA, Cloud Security Alliance. What it is it's a consortium of the large cloud-based companies. It's an industry group. But what this industry group does is they really work toward assuring that cloud-based data and cloud-based systems in general are secure. Why? Because the more people feel that it's secure, the more willing people will be to use those types of products and services. Now, in fact, specifically related to security, I have it in the full day of this class, not in this deck, because you obviously can't do everything. As it is, I'm trying to fly through data with you. But look up, do a Google search on the Notorious 9. THE Notorious 9. It sounds like basically a mafia movie, but what it is it's basically the 9 areas of computer security that you have to safeguard as it relates to cloud computing. But to the definition here, for those of you who have been on webinars with me before, is, if it's in great big blue letters, I have to read it to you. It's the law. But anyway, cloud data management and governance is the discipline of involving the discipline in, I can't even say it, is a discipline involving the processes, rules, and technologies. And what are these for? It's for managing and government data and governing management. I can't even talk today. Wow. And managing and governing data in cloud computing environments. Is that there's a very scary thing. I'm a DBA, database administrator by background, then an application developer actually before going into management. And as a DBA, as someone who was in charge of data governance, you really want to know where all your data is. You want to be able to get to it all. You want to be able to compare one type of data to another type of data to assure accuracy. Well, you know what happens when you move all your applications into the cloud? You have shattered your data model. Why? Because say that you go to Salesforce.com for your CRM system. Great application, but you know what? The size of the data fields, the values that they use are defined by the vendor. Using Oracle Financials, certainly you can make modifications to those under the covers. However, is that most of the time, just from a cost perspective, upgradability perspective, you're going to want to use their definitions. Or if you're using for manufacturing, if you have other systems outside of your core, outside of your firewall in the cloud, what's going to happen is you're using their data definitions. You can't get to their data as regularly as you can if it's sitting in an Oracle database inside of your firewall. So these are the issues that you're going to have from cloud. Now let's talk about some of the situational issues one at a time. One, each cloud provider offers its own definitions. Last name field we've been discussing, but I'm going to give you another. The international code for the company of Germany is DE for Deutschland. However, many of the older systems, you don't see it as much inside the US now, but the US abbreviation, if you're using that set, again, not as common anymore, is GER. For what? For Germany. The suggestions here, what you need to do is you need to perform cross-application type analysis on this to see where it's being used. And as data feeds come into your company, if some of them use DE and some of them use GER, or whatever the code bases are, as you get that data coming into your organization from vendors, you need a centralized place to do the data translation to assure that that data within your organization is consistent. Next, data movement issues. You know, if you're using multiple cloud-based applications, and here I'm going to go back to that example of you have an account, you have a client or a customer who's not paying their bills. You need to get that information over to the salespeople to know not to sell more product. I'm sure you remember. I hope you remember that example I used. Well, that was easy when both these applications were inside your firewall. But now what you do is you need to have basically what's meant by a star model is that all the cloud-based vendors you have externally, you bring data down from them, use it internally, and then distribute it back out. So now instead of your sales system doing a quick, say, web services hit to your accounts receivable system, now what you have to do is you have to physically pass that data in bulk, usually, download it from accounts receivable to your platform, upload that data into your CRM system so that as needed it can look and inform the sales force. The next situation, trans application. What happens is sometimes you have a single type application, someone buys a product. What you want to do to that, say for example when they buy it, is you want to update the accounts receivable system. The next thing that you want to do is you want to deduct it from say they bought a physical device, a widget. You want to deduct that from your inventory system. What you also want to do is you want to credit the commission to the salesperson, etc. Well, what that's called is that's basically called a multi-application commit, a multi-data commit. If it's all in the same big database, it's much easier. But what happens is now is you may have transactions going over out to 4 different systems now outside of your firewall, which means you have to develop extra software internally. This is the hidden cost of cloud-based applications to make this work. Some of the suggestions for it are you have to control all the data movement inside your organization. Why? Because again, you can't pass things from cloud to cloud. As of right now, there is no corporate standard for that. Next is another big hidden cost of moving to a heavily based cloud or a heavily cloud-based infrastructure and strategy within your IT organization is that you now have to build a data warehouse to handle analytical type issues and these cross-application things that I was mentioning. So all of this data that you have to now then bring down from your accounts receivable system to pass to your sales system, all of this inventory system that data you may have to bring up to pass to other applications internally. Well, what you end up doing is spending a lot of money from an application development and database administration perspective on data movement and data storage. Also from an analytics perspective, yes, a lot of these applications, what they do is they have their own environments where you can do analytics on their data. However, is that actually one who now has a full database that's allowing them to compete with Oracle in this way is SAP. SAP now has a full database environment. I guess it came out a few years ago. But anyway, what happens is because they have all of your ERP data, you can also bring other data up into the cloud there to compare it and integrate it with all the ERP data within your systems. They really had to do that to be able to basically, well, not only gain that business, but minimize the need for their customers to now be developing probably big Oracle databases within their firewall to do the analytics. Now let's move to data governance. Certainly I've alluded to it in a number of different occasions, but now let's dig right into big data, and well, big data in a big way. How's that? Big blue letters, you know what that means. All right, and this is from IBM. The objective of governing information for an organization is to move information as quickly as is practical. In other words, you want to have good processes internally that lets you move the data to where it needs to be, while keeping the quality as high as practical. I've used that word practical once before. What does that mean? So let's say is that, you know, do you want all your data to be 100% correct? Yes. Do you want to press a button and whoosh, it's everywhere? Yes. But what happens is, this is where it says practical, what it means is financially reasonable. In other words, if this is data you use once a month to close your accounting books at the end of the month, do you need to have real-time feeds that populate that data on an ongoing basis? No. You only have to make sure that it's going to be getting there as needed. So when you think of it, and then the last is certainly as secure as practical. I'll talk about secure in a minute. But basically, as you look at data, it's used for different reasons. The speed of it is done for, it has different, let me say, speed requirements. Also, quite frankly, it has different quality rules. So for each data type, one thing that you should be doing from a data governance perspective, whether it's big data or not, is make sure you're moving it from a practicalness. In other words, you don't want to buy a Ferrari just to bring milk back and forth from the store on Tuesday mornings. Even though it would be a fun trip, probably not the best use of those assets. Now, let's talk about some basic principles related to data governance. Again, you'll see what I've done is I've highlighted the sort of keywords associated with each of these items. The first, be nimble. Now, remember, when we're talking about big data, it could include transaction data. It could include data contained within your data file logs or your website logs or anywhere else. But the whole idea of big data isn't, wow, we have lots of data, how do we process it? What it's really about is it feeds toward analytics. Because if you think of the three levels of data, the three levels that data go through in a big data environment, is level one is sort of the collection and storage. It could be every one of the billion tweets a day that's done if you're doing social media type analytics. It could be every click that happens on the Amazon website because they use that to figure out how to make more money from the website, how to improve the customer, oh, I'm going blank on the word. Let me see. I'll just use a different one. I'm getting old, I guess. Either that or I didn't have enough coffee this morning. Experience. Improve the customer experience of people coming in. But basically, the three levels in big data are you have tons of stuff that you've collected from lots of areas. You need to effectively store it. That's what the Hadoop layer does, basically. It takes this big data, this way more data that can be processed using standard data methods, spreads it over multiple Linux machines. So then the second step of Hadoop, it's called MapReduce. What happens there is it's processes, it's basically Java base class type stuff. That what you can do is you write that and it retrieves data across these multiple servers in parallel to create discrete data. What's discrete data? It's basically data that's small enough and in a structured format that can be analyzed. And then the third level is analytics. Quite frankly, we've been doing the creating structured data and feeding it through analytics for 50 years. And by the analytic tools, R is actually a very big scripting process analytics language that's now being used. But what you also have along with there is business objects, SPSS, SAS, all of those applications that have been around, but now there's been much heavier investment in them to allow them to integrate into the big data world. So why you'll see as you look at these principles is let's get all the data, let's move it where we need to, let's make sure that it's right, let's tie it into marketing, let's use it for predictive micro analytics on our website like Amazon does and Google does actually and others. But so let's see, be nimble. What does that mean? Be responsive to change, whether that change is based on new technologies, customer needs, or internal processes to help improve the company. Be compliant. In other words, there are certain social compacts that are done. In other words, is the privacy things that you see, where it says we promise not to sell your data. There's also data that's illegal for you to sell. Things along that line. So are you doing things with the data? There's an old story, and I will tell you that the story is it's a wives' tale. It's not real. But what it is people were saying that, and I know this because I actually did some training for Target. People said that their analytics was so good that they were sending a young girl, like a 14, 15-year-old girl, information about pregnancy and baby information. Her father sued the company for them sending her stuff like that at such a young age. And then what happened is that they said that Target was able to do this because of their advanced analytics based on other products they bought. Totally not true. That is truly an urban legend. I did training to many of the people who do the analytics there. I said, you know about the urban legend? They all laughed, and they said, we're good, but we're not that good. All right, but don't you think that if all of a sudden you're going into a hardware store and you're buying paint and new curtains and other things that people do when they're getting ready to sell their house, don't you think all of a sudden you're going to be getting things along the lines with from Century 21 or Remax or other companies like that to try to get your listing? That's where social compliance comes in, of what you can and cannot do. Manage quality. Well, that's pretty obvious. Is how are you going to maintain the quality of the data that you're using for these analytics? Next is, your people are your means. This is training. These are the posters that you put up on the wall that say, be careful of our data, consider privacy, and so on. Mapping your data, as the underlined words are here, is, there's data movement and there's data at rest. And it's your job in data governance is maintaining both of those. Data at rest is your databases, data warehouses, etc., making sure that the data in there is accurate. And the data movement was, like I mentioned before, when you're moving data from your payroll system, where last name is 15 characters, into your human resources system, where it's 25 characters, if you're going to do it, and you're going to blow away those 10 characters of data, at least know that you're going to do it and make it from a decision of knowledge rather than by default. And lastly is getting, data is the language of business. Actually, technically, it's COBOL was the language of business, but we won't go there. But anyway, is that if you understand as an IT, I'm going to speak IT person to IT person now. If you understand data, you will understand your business. So the better you understand your business and your data, the better you'll be able to work with those on the business side that you're there to support. Next, manage classification. In other words, what is the contents of the data? What is its source? How do you know it's credible? Protecting it, and then fostering stewardship. That's where you see those data privacy signs in all of the kitchens and the restrooms around your offices. You see those posters on the wall. That's what they're doing. It's the data governance and the security people trying to inform and keep those topics on the top of mind of those working at the company. And the last two here is managing long-term requirements, which is done through policy and standards, and feedback when data is wrong, when it's being misused, when it's being lost, when it's being stolen. What are the escalation processes that will bring it under control? Next, fostering innovation. Is governance, if you're not careful, if it gets too paperwork heavy and paperwork oriented, then what happens, it can be really easy to say, well, we have to do it this way, it's the only way it can be done, and in fact lose the imagination and the innovation that can be done with that data. So it's a fine line between doing what needs to be done and governed and controlled, and not losing the innovative thoughts by those who are using that data. And next is third-party control. Actually, I should say next and last of this list here, is what that is the third-party control of your content. Any vendors you work with, whether they're storing data for you, whether they're distributing it, whatever it is, you as the primary data organization, you're still in charge of it. I'll give you an example of this. If you're working in a medical devices or in a hospital setting, for example, your data center, if it's a cloud-based vendor, needs to be HIPAA compliant. If your data center is HIPAA compliant and your vendor or cloud-based vendor is not HIPAA compliant, then all of a sudden neither are you. Lawsuits will begin, fines will begin, etc. So just remember that any data that you're getting from external being collected for you, or that you're using and either distributing yourself or distributing the results of through proxies, you have to make sure that you understand that entire data chain, because at the end of the day, you're the ones responsible for it. Now, what should be governed? Well, as shown here, it's the owner of the particular data set. Who is it? Whose name, whose paycheck is tied to that data? And that is basically the assignment of responsibility. Is it being appropriately stored correctly? Also, data leakage. What's data leakage? It's basically the combination of data being stolen and data being lost, or it becoming so old, just and antiquated over time, that it's no longer really of value, but it's being integrated into into existing data sets for analytical purposes. Who has authorization to get to the data? And then what are the controls and audit procedures in place to assure that the above things shown on this list are actually in place? Now let's talk about metadata specifically, and as it relates to both data governance and then to administration and business. Metadata, operational perspective, you want to make sure that it's current. That in other words is that the data that you have, the definitions of each data is correct. It's data lineage. That means, where did it come from? Is it some things that are just being pulled from your internal transactions, which give it a much higher percentage chance of being right than data you're just buying from a vendor? What are the data handling processes related to the statistics and the when things are wrong? How do you know it's wrong? The report titles on different reports with the same data, do they have the same name or different names? The usage statistics, so you'll know if you know what data is never, if you have data that is taking up 3 huge disk drives and haven't been used in 10 years, maybe what you want to do is move it off of live storage. Changing data capture methods. In other words, how is data collected? And then, of course, the auditing and logging of that data moving forward. Now let's look at it from an administrative perspective. Basically, big data comes from one of 3 places. It's either machine-generated, log files, meters, GPS on your cell phones, etc. It's social media data. You know, there are firms that one of them in Boston, actually in Cambridge, I should say, Massachusetts, that comes to mind, that they get a data feed of the 1 billion tweets a day that are done on Twitter. and they store them, and what they do is that they analyze them using syntactical and symbolic analysis on it to figure out what does that mean, you know, on certain topics. Like if I sold shoes, I might want to know what everyone's saying about shoes these days. They will do those analytics through it. And lastly, it comes from traditional places, you know, your ERP or your CRM systems. All of that data can be collected and integrated in ways that can either give your marketing and sales and senior management people insights or directly make money. Next is access descriptions. Where is the data coming from? What are its connectors? In other words, are you connecting to all of your core data through ODBC, through Apache Flume, which is that's open source by the Apache Foundation, that lets you access data and update data contained in the Hadoop file structures, import and output of data, or import-export rather, and then data extraction. Is that what data are you allowing to come out of it, and is it being done in an efficient way? And then also from an administrative perspective is the storage descriptions. What data models are you using? You know, are they multidimensional? And if so, what tools are being used for that? All of this stuff should be defined within the metadata of your systems. And then lastly, as shown in the bottom here, is the data cleansing rules. Namely, not only how do you clean it, but then when it's transformed and it's used, at the end of the day, how do you get rid of it? And lastly, metadata from a business perspective. You know, if you work for a really big IT shop, it's really, really easy to think that a company exists so that it can have an IT group. I say that tongue-in-cheek because over my career, I've been in very, very big data areas, and you sort of IT groups, and you forget sometimes that you're really there to support the business as opposed to being an entity unto yourself. So at the end of the day, the metadata that you create must be in business terms, not just in technical terms. The data ownership must be defined so it can be used for business purposes. Data distribution lists tied to your security folks who can and cannot see this data. The data representation styles is how are you giving it to people. There are people who spend their life's work in this fourth bullet point on how to figure out, certainly not canned reports, but how to do ad hoc queries, the analysis, dashboards, scoreboards, data visualization. How do you take data and properly display it in graphs? Things like, if you're familiar with it, 3D graphics, heat maps. Things like that on how to take data and make it immediately intelligible by the business users who are using this. And then certainly data discovery, which is like, for data warehouses, you hear a lot of data mining, things along that line. And then certainly the security of it all. So these are all of the things that when you think of data governance, whether it be from data itself, from big data or cloud data, it's a dramatically expanded world. Things that we talk about in the class that we just can't get to here as it is. This was an hour of drinking like through a fire hose. But it's how do you handle data as it relates to mobile devices, as it relates to other distribution mechanisms. These are the things that you have to consider when you're thinking about data, cloud, and big data governance. I hope this last 56 minutes has been of value to you. As promised, I wanted to give you as much value as I think the expression is stuff into 56 or 57 minutes. Coming forward, what I'd like to just say is that if you're interested in these topics on the left, what you'll see is we do one of these free webinars once a month. Next month's topic on September 21st is Thinking Like a CIO. We also have 2 one-day classes coming up. We are the exclusive training provider for 2 books by Jay Elliott, one called The Steve Jobs Way and the other Leading Apple with Steve Jobs. It's fascinating when you strip off his bravado, what his concepts on leadership and management and organizational structure and innovation are just fascinating. And then the expanded version of this to a full day is on October 12th. Also, as shown on the right, is our next one actually is September 29th, 30th, and October 1st. I'd sign up quickly. I think there's only 1 or 2 spots left. We do this class on virtually a monthly basis. And what it is, it's the 10 topics listed here toward a certification in IT management called the ITMLP. For information on any of these classes, feel free to go to www.managermechanics.com or talk to your New Horizons sales rep. From here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it back to Brian for any last words or questions that have come in.
Yeah, if anybody has a question in regards to anything that Eric went over, if you wanted to type it in the chat box, I can share those with Eric. Give some people a few seconds here. I want to thank Eric for his time. He greatly went over so much information in such a short period of time that I think it gave everybody a great oversight of what there is to offer and what either the course has to offer, what other webinars that he runs how they could benefit them, and help them, be a little bit more successful or help them get a better idea of what they have going on in their daily work life. So Eric, it doesn't look like there's any questions. So once again, I want to thank you for you and your time and let everybody know that if you do have any other questions, please visit managermechanics.com or reach out to your account executive through New Horizons. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Thank you all. Yep. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for all for hanging with me for an hour, and hope you join us again. Best wishes and thank you.